Today we will talk about React.js and we'll spend about an hour exploring from basic to advanced React.js, talking about many different
Sure.
aspects of it. That will cover starting from creating the first React app, what installation you need in your local machine. Then we will see we'll use one of the IDEs, but you are free to use any IDE of your choice. So we'll use Visual Studio Code, which is a free version available. And then we'll see various different extensions which helps us build React, right? So you may want to learn a lot of things from React, but if you keep typing the old things again and again, that will not increase your skill set. So I don't believe in that, right? So once you learn, you just move on and then you learn more advanced. So if you keep doing this basic stuff, so we can use some of the extension to do the basic stuff for us. So we'll learn that part also. So it's a free flowing thing. So we do not have a fixed agenda. So I kind of try to keep it open. So and I will give you my understanding and the my way, take you to the journey I took while I learned React. So that's the whole purpose of this call. So let's jump into this. So this is my demo machine, okay? And in this machine, I have got two things installed. So if you go to nodejs.org portal, you can install Node in your local machine. So if you're using Windows, Mac, or Linux desktop, you can use Node in any machine. So go to nodejs.org, just download and install it. If it is Linux, it will have the command option available. So you follow the instruction and it will be good to go. So there is no, let's say, rocket science required to install Node. It's pretty simple. Even in Windows, it's just an installer. You click next, next, and you are done, right? So I have done that. So if you want to see what the version no I have, I right now have version 14.15.4. That's the Node version I have, right? So I can go ahead and also Node installs npm. So npm is the package manager. So Node package manager, it comes along with the Node. So you get npm by default as part of the Node installation. So I can in my machine, when I installed Node, it basically installed the version 7.19.0. That's the NPM version I have, right? And you can see that NPM comes with a lot of nice things. So NPM itself is a topic to talk about. So I'm not going to discuss this NPM here, but remember that if you need to use a library, no more copying the library from some repository. We use npm and then ask for the library, and it gets added to our project. And that's how Node works. The benefit is that if the library provider changes the library version and brings in new version, we can just update that until it'll download the latest one. So we don't have to do all those heavy lifting of copying the JavaScript file into our project and then using it. And if there is any problem, some update, we don't know about it, there's no link. So it makes life easier. So we have both of them. Now, when you install npm, there is something which comes along with this called npx. Okay, so let me do something. Let me increase the font size here. Okay, and then see if I can basically show you something over here. So if you can see my screen, I will not be spending a lot of time over here, but I want to show you how easily you can build a React app and then keep running. Now remember that React app is sitting on top of Node and it uses a lot of JavaScript library. If you start from scratch, the blank one, and then you will be probably spending a lot of time configuring all those settings in your different files, right? So which basically is not very productive in my sense. Uh, what I think personally, it's not very productive to spend on, right? Rather, Facebook came up with some utility called Create Node App. and that utility is available along with npm. So if you say npx, so what it means that it'll not only download all the libraries but also execute it. So which means that if it will set it up for you and then make things ready for you, whatever you need to make to build a React app. So that's a step number one. And it will never fail if you take this approach to build a first React app. It will basically help you have the React app created pretty easily. So we'll say create React dash app. So create dash React dash app, and then you give the name here, app dash name. Now what this will do, this will start downloading lots and lots and lots of libraries from npm, right? I'll create a folder called app dash name, and that's your app, and then it'll basically download and install the React DOM, React scripts, CRA templates, and all necessary things. Create a package.json, which basically tells you how you can run this. And all of these things will happen one by one for you. Now, while it is happening, I want to talk a bit about history of the React and how it started. Now, most of you may know that React is a UI JavaScript library. Okay, so it is not a framework; it's a library. It was built by somebody called Jordan Walke. So Jordan Walke was a software engineer in Facebook, and he released this with a name called Fax.js. And Facebook used that library to build their news feed back in 2011. And after that, the Instagram used it in 2012, the same library. And then people started contributing to it. Facebook started um, investing on this, build a lot of new feature, so on and so forth. And finally, in the year 2013, after the release, internal release in 2011, in 2013, Facebook open sourced it in JS Conference in the United States. So JavaScript, whosoever uses JavaScript, they know about JS Conference. So JS Conference is a pretty popular JavaScript conference happens, and that's where the React got announced in 2013 on May, right? And now what we are using is the stable version that is 16.8, which basically got released in February 16, 2019. And we kind of, this 16 is a major version, right? The 16 version got released in 2017. And till then, actually, we have now the release candidate version 1.7. So 17 is the release candidate version, not ready for production. So it is highly recommended that you can use it for testing purpose. But what React claims to do, say that they don't have any breaking changes right now at this point in time with version 17. Also, there's a working group set up for version number 18. So they're on version number 18. We have a couple of plans, quite interesting plans. You can always read through these plans from an official page. So if you ask me, what is the documentation I follow? Where should I go to learn about React? There is only one place, that is reactjs.org. That's the official portal for React, right? So you will find not only about the documentation, they have nice tutorial explaining each of the core concepts. And then you will also hear about the future plan and the roadmap of the upcoming releases, right? So it's an interesting place, right? But beyond that, people have created nice little blogs individually, but you have to keep searching for those information. So if you need one single place, reactjs.org is the place for you. Because it is not only official, but also validated and contributed by people like you and me, right? So it is always tested, validated, and fixed if there is any error, etc. So you can see it is taking longer time, right? So it basically downloads around 200 MB sort of files, right? So you can see that it will still work on. So I just would like this to finish. And this is one-time activity. So if you're building a React app, you will not be doing it every day, right? So this is for the day one of your exercise. So when you start building a React app, you do this and it will download everything. And you can see that it will also give you an instruction to run this application. So I haven't yet opened my any IDE. So I use the command prompt to create my first app, and it is getting created, right? And it is getting created in a specific folder. It created a folder called app name, and you can see it's done, right? Now it has got small instruction. What it is asking me is that it is asking me to go inside that folder. So let's go to that folder. So I'll say cd, the change directory, app dash name. So if I go into that app dash name, I need to run something called npm start. If I do that, it automatically will start a browser with localhost port 3000. Okay. Now, once this is kind of compiled and then checked, everything is checked by this compiler, etc. So it will basically run this in my local port, right? So this is the first time. So first time always takes a bit while, right? So you can see that it is telling you that the server is starting. The server got started, right? And it is started loading into localhost port 3000. That's the React page. Now, what happens in the React? Why it takes longer time? Not just because it has libraries, but because it uses some sort of translation. So React can be written in either by using JavaScript or by using TypeScript. In both the cases, there is a small utility which comes into play called Babel. What Babel library does, it translates them into the conventional JavaScript so that if you use any modern JavaScript, which is not supported by the older browser, still the Babel can convert it into something back which is understood by the older browser, right? So that's what it does when you do the build for the first time. So I ran npm start, and it showed me the first React app. This is your first React app. And let us see how that folder looks like, right? So what I can do, I can just keep this running, and I can go inside, I can open my Visual Studio Code. So let me just open the Visual Studio Code in the here. And what I can do, I can just open the folder. So I said close this folder, and I go ahead and open this folder. So I navigate to the folder, and I go to this. That's the app name. So you can see the time, right? It got created at around 6:10 p.m. local time. So this is the folder. So I select the folder, and it opens that folder, right? So you can see that now I have my folder open, and this basically shows up all the files which got created by the utility called create React app. That's again from Facebook. So Facebook basically did provide us this beautiful thing. So you can see that there is a package.json. So React is sitting on top of Node, right? So it basically has the same structure as Node. And you can see that it basically did all the heavy lifting for you. So it has scripts associated. So that's when I said npm start. Eventually, I had to run this command to start the React. Instead, I said npm start, so you can actually run multiple scripts. That's the kind of script runner process in the Node world. And then you have got this dependencies. So dependencies in the sense like what all libraries you may need. So it basically figure out all of them. It's sort of like a template, right? So you don't have to do all those addition, right? Add npm install command manually by hand. It is taken care automatically for you. So you can see that they're all nicely available. So this app is still running, right? Now what I wanted to show you is that the main part of this app. Now there are two folders, right? Forget about this node modules because node module is purely for libraries. So all the libraries you need for React, I just want to show you the list here. It's a huge one, right? So you have got lots and lots and lots of libraries you need for React. So we don't need to care about it, right? So these are all the dependencies of my dependency. So they use internally other libraries, so they bring them all in. So JavaScript is a pretty, it's like a simple text file. So you basically have the same file always part of the same library if that library uses the other modules. So it will not focus here, so it is automatically created. In fact, when we actually do a source control, we don't basically store this node module because this is the heaviest folder, right? It is around 200 MB. So we exclude this folder. We just put the package.json. And because we have this dependency, we can say npm init. So npm restore. So it will basically restore all of them. So npm basically takes care of the bringing back the libraries again to the local folder. So rest of the files are pretty simple, right? And small. Now this is the landing page. React app is a single page application. So you will find only one HTML page. That's it. Okay. And everything you do is basically getting rendered into this single HTML page, right? That's the page. Now, if you see that there are a lot of comment here, right? So let me just delete them so that it looks a bit smaller, right? And I wanted to focus on one area. That is this area, this div. Okay. This div has got an ID called root. Okay. And this is the pointer for my React app to place the controls or components as React talks about here. So what React does is that React writes JavaScript. React don't write HTML anymore. Okay, only one HTML. Now, if you see here, you have something called app.js. If I open this app.js, you will find that it has got some thing which you basically have seen in the browser. Now, if I open the browser in the side, right, and let's say this one, and if I try to, let's say, open it side by side, maybe, and I hide this, what I can do, I can get rid of this whole header thing, okay, and it'll clean up everything. Now, I just need to save it, and then once it is saved, you can see that nothing is visible. So this is gone, right? And if I just put h1 hello, okay, so the h1 tag would probably show up in your page. So it is um, you can do a live change in your application. So if you are making, see, I can make the changes and it's is directly reflecting into that. So this is the place where I'm going to put all my components. Okay, this app.js. If I remove them, no component is available. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and create a new component. Now generally in React, what people do, they create a folder called component inside src. So if I create components, okay, and then each of the component can not only have, let's say, the JS file, the JavaScript file, but they can also have CSS or logos or images, which is part of that same file, right? So you can actually create a folder for each component and put all of them together. That becomes easier for you to maintain and manage, right? Because you keep adding component in this project. So it's also one of the ways to group them into single folder for each of these components. But I'm not going to add any CSS or logo for my component, so I don't create that. But that's the way to go, right? So if I say hello, now it starts with capital letter. So I create a file called hello.js. Okay. Now this is my component. Now what I'm also going to use and show you that you also should think about using is an extension called ES7. Okay. That's part of this Visual Studio Code, and it's freely available as well. And what it does, I just wanted to show you that component. It's already installed. It basically gives you a set of, let's say, let me maximize it, set of code snippets for ES7, React, Redux, GraphQL, React Native kind of applications. So if you are building any of these things, you will be able to basically get the basic code structure available for you. And I'm going to show you quickly how we can do that. Now, I'm going to use the first thing I'm going to say that I'm going to create simple function component. So what is function component means in React? It's JavaScript. It uses a JavaScript function which returns me some HTML with JavaScript. I say RF. See, it's just going to load it. Sometimes it takes a longer time. Let me close this. Open this hello.js. So just wait for this loading to happen. So this basically will show me the component automatically. Otherwise, I'm going to write it for you, right? So now you can see that it's there. So React functional components. So these are all code snippets. So I don't have to write by hand. So I can just select that. Okay. So you see that it imports the React class from the React library and defines a JavaScript function. So this is JavaScript function. And then inside that function, I say h1. So I say hello React JS. Okay. So that's my component. Now my component is ready. It's ready to show me this h1 tag. But to show that in app.js, what I need to do is that I need to bring that component in. Because this component is a module, you can see that it uses some export default. That means it is acting as a module. I can import it over here. So I can say import hello from, and then I say this single quote dot slash means the same folder, and then I go to this components folder slash and I say hello. Now you can either type hello.js or just leave it like that. So it doesn't require you to provide JS all the time. So I have referred that, and then here this is your HTML tag, and you do not have anything, so you can just have a self-closing tag. Now once you do that, let me open the browser. You can see that hello React.js is showing up in the browser. Okay. Now let me show you something beyond that. Now I don't need to use this app.js anymore, but what happens if I want to, let's say, pass some value from the app through an attribute, right? That's what the React is really powerful about. Now, if you look at this app.js, I can have a property called fname or first name, and I just pass on the first name, my first name. And then if I want to show it in this hello, React uses something called props. Now let me run them side by side. Okay, and then you can see that right now it is using hello React.js. Now this is where I need to use something like dynamic. So React uses something called props. So if you say props, now what happens is props is setup properties you can pass. So it's not just one, but it can be many. So for example, if I say props, now you notice here that it keeps changing at the other side because I have autosave. Now I know that there is a property called fname. Okay, if you pass on that, then it will start showing you the name. Now this syntax is known as JSX. Now it is neither JavaScript nor HTML, right? It is a combination of everything. So it is a like syntactical sugar, they call it. And what Babel does, it picks up from this and then converts that into pure HTML and pure JavaScript. So we don't have to do that, but we can write inline JavaScript with HTML without doing a string concatenation, right? So that makes our life easier. And React introduced this JSX concept with that, and really looks neat, right? So you don't have to really do a lot more stuff. Now, if I go back to my app.js, okay, and I add, let's say, something like dash my last name, now because I have only one property, so you can see that it start immediately reflected as soon as I saved it. So this is how you can display or show the data which may be dynamic in nature, right? So you can have things from properties, right? And then you can display them over here. Now the same thing can be achieved using something like a class component, right? So I'll leave this app.js as is, but I'm going to delete this uh, class component, this functional component which I created, which use JavaScript. So I can say RC C. Now RCC stands for a class component. So basically I use the snippet. So you can see that it uses a JavaScript class with a name called hello, and it extends. So that's inheritance, right? So it basically uses a base class called component and extends the component and returns something similar to that. So I'll say h1, okay, and then say hello from class component. If I leave it like that, now what happens? It displays because the app.js still refers to this hello.js. Doesn't really matter whether I build a functional component or a class component, it will display the same thing. So for React, it doesn't change a lot, right? So the way I want to build. Now to do the same thing which I was doing earlier, to get the property value, which is a fname, from the control to this, what I can do, I need to basically, because it is a and earlier I was passing that prop as a parameter in the function. Now this time I cannot pass it as a parameter of a class because class is not a function. So what I need to do, I need to do it through constructor. So or const is the syntactical thing helper, right? So you get a snippet, and then our const, this is where I can set prop. Now in the class component, this kind of thing is managed through state. So there is a state management available with class, and that's why you can see that this dot state coming up. Now this is an object, right? So this is a JavaScript object. So I can have anything, let's say EMP name. This is just the name I gave, right? It doesn't really need to match with the prop. Now EMP name comes from what? Props dot fname. Okay. Now I set this up. This is fine, but I need to put it in the proper place. Now what I need to do, I need to use this, and then I need to replace it in this JSX. Now you see that if you use curly braces, you can write JavaScript inside. So that's the variable, etc. So I can say this dot state dot emp name, and then it will start showing you the name coming from that attribute, right? So you catch hold of the props through a constructor in class component. This is a bit different from the functional component, right? So in functional component, you pass it through parameter, but in class component, you need to initialize. Now, you notice here, while I'm doing initialization, I'm initializing the constructor of the hello class. And also I need to initialize the constructor of the component class by saying super. We basically pass. So in C# we call it base. In JavaScript we call it super. Super means you are just initializing with the same value to the base class, right? So that's how generally the inheritance works. And then once you have that initialized, you can actually set it anywhere. You can put it in a variable. You can do anything, manipulation in a function. You can call a function with that value, change the value, and then return something, a different string, and display that string in an h1 tag. Do all sort of things, right? So then it is up to you. Once you get the value, how you modify, how you want to display is totally up to you. Now this is a simple class component which can actually use the state management feature to display your props. Now what is the real use case of this state management feature? Now if I continue with this function, right? And then if I, let's say, get the prop value from the my app.js as a static property value, but then I have a text box. So let's say I have got a text box that is input. So I need to write input type equals to text. And then I want to do something over here. So I can actually self-close it. So I now need to show the value of that prop inside this input. So what I can do, I can say value equals to, and then I can use the JSX syntax, this dot state dot emp name, and it's going to show inside the text box again, right? Nothing fancy about it, just the way I did earlier. But you find that when I try to type something, it doesn't allow me. So I'm just trying to press anything, that even I select it, delete it, I cannot delete it, right? So I can just right click and try to cut. It doesn't cut, right? So it still stays with that, sticks with that. So that's the problem with the class component when you use input type. Now, how do you handle that input type? Is that every time you make any change to the content of this, you can call or create a function to handle that. So to do that, we need to write a bit of code over here. So what this code looks like, I will say on change. Now, remember in the JSX, whenever you define an event, you define an event like this. You start with small and then the next word will be caps, right? So that's the thing. So I'll say on change, and you say on change, and then you call some JavaScript function. Now, either you have that function declared on top and then you call that function, or you can write an inline function using the arrow function syntax. So how that arrow function syntax looks like, it takes a parameter. Now, what is this parameter? It's the event from where this event got generated. Use something called fat arrow. So the fat arrow is a arrow. So it basically is a function, parameter, and the body. So we're writing now body, and the body says that set the state. Now, set state takes an object. Okay, so let's create that object. So in that set state, what I can do, I can say emp name, and then set the state with e dot target dot value. So what basically means is that I am reading this control, and then whatever the value is inside the control, whatever the smallest change I make, this event gonna trigger immediately as soon as there is a change. And as soon as there is a change in the text, it will immediately catch hold of that text and put it back into this. Now, because I'm using it, it'll automatically change it. Now, if I say delete this, you can see that it is now reflecting, right? So I can say again, it shows. So you can see that's the immediate reflect, right? That's how React maintains the state internally using this state object, right? That's the class component feature. So whenever you need to really maintain a state and then change things dynamically in this kind of scenario use cases, you will be using this kind of approach, right? So I showed you one such example where people can come and change that. So for example, if you have other input types like radio button or a password field or something like that, you can always handle those things with this change event, right? Now, let me add something here. Okay. Now, what I have seen that we have this thing, let me also extend this a bit more. Okay. So let me take this whole thing, create a copy, and then I say emp fname, and then say emp lname. Okay. That's the last name. And then I use another property called last name. Okay, so I say emp fname 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 lname lname. Okay, and then I say the full name with, let's say, last name comma first name. Okay, something like this. Okay, now I don't have anything like that in app.js, so I say that, hey, you don't send this, rather you say lname. Okay, and this is where you pass on the second name. Now I need to finish it off, and then as soon as you are done with that, you can see that it shows me both the values. Now if I come back to hello.js, what I can now essentially do, I can probably put a break so that it shows in the next line rather than showing side by side, and then I can put a, say, a last name. and I put something like this, and then I can say first name, and I can put something like this. So you can see that now they are basically split. And then as soon as I change something over here, it changes into that. So depending on what is the value you are changing, it shows that what that is. So if you have multiple controls, you can always have the state variable with multiple properties, right? So you can have as many properties as you want. So all the values can be set as a property. So it's basically one after another. So you can have, let's say, email, phone, etc., all part of the property, and then use that in such a way, right? So that's what I wanted to show. So it's not just one, it can be more than one, right? So you can have more properties added into that. Now, what is interesting is that React always recommends that you should avoid this kind of class component as much as possible, okay? Because it is a bit heavy. And you can see that number of lines of code I need to write to that. And also, this has got some life cycle events. So you don't probably do this kind of simple task, which I'm showing you as a demo, but you have a lot of different life cycle events for a class, which you need to handle while you build the real React app. For example, when a control renders, during the render, post the render, what happens, right? So you need to actually explicitly do them all by hand. Now, React introduced something called hooks. Hooks is an intelligent way to handle the state in functional component, right? So the 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 requirement of a class component was always because you wanted to maintain a state, right? That's why people created class component. And class component, there is nothing wrong in it. But it is because it is too heavy, and because our functional component cannot handle this state management, we always have to rely on the class component, right? But with the introduction to the hooks in React, you should be able to now do that same thing in functional component. Now let me be a bit brutal, right? You notice here, you have got around 40 lines of code, right? So I select all and delete them. Now, if I do that, I just go back to my good old functional component, RFC, okay? And that's my functional component, which takes a parameter called props because I'm getting that props. So I don't need, let's say, the state object here because it doesn't work. Now, what I need is that I need something called hook. And to use the hook, I need to call that library. So to call the library, I say use state. That's one of the hooks in React, use state. So this is for state management. So when you call this use state, you will be able to now use the state in React functions. Now, how do we do that? Now, there are certain rules to it. Now, when you use this, you basically use the array spread operator for array, right? So, for example, you probably know that there is something called in modern JavaScript called object deconstruction. We also have something called array deconstruction, so which means that if you have an array and you want to replace the element of an array with some element of another array, you can actually explicitly put it in the right side as that normal array, and the left side is the outcome, and it will automatically replace. So you don't have to run a loop, go to that index and set explicitly each of the element. You don't have to do that. So you can do quite efficiently. And JavaScript really helps us in doing that. So I'll use const, okay? So const is constant, so I'm not going to change things. So remember one thing in the React kind of world, we use always try to use everything which is um, immutable. So we try to create a copy. We don't, let's say, change the actual object, mainly because then we can run them parallelly, and the function will not break, because if you keep changing an existing value continuously and then if you try to run them parallelly, if the sequence breaks, then the whole logic might break. So we always create a copy, do that, and then create a copy, do that. And it doesn't really matter a lot nowadays because we have enough memory, etc. But if you're doing a large record set, millions of record in JavaScript, then you should try to avoid this kind of immutability, right? So you try to make things immutable, right? So which means that change the live object, do something on your own. So we're not going to that discussion. But let's say I have got this fname, and then if you have that fname, what I say, set fname. Okay, so this first one is the value, and second one is the method. And then I initialize that with the use state object. And then when I use the state, I use the prop, initialize that with prop fname. Okay, so you put a different name, let's say emp, it's your variable, you can give any name, which will be replaced by this value. And then the set fname will basically be a method to manipulate this. Now, if I go back in my previous kind of example where I was having an input type and an h1 tag, so if I use this h1 tag and say hello, and then pass on the value, and this time I'm going to simply pass emp fname. Notice here the amount of lines and the characters you need to type. It's pretty simple. You don't have to say this dot state dot empfname, which I was doing earlier, right? So it is as simple as that. Now, once I have that ready, what I can do, I can also have my input type text. Now, if I do the text thing, and then I just close this, and to set the value, I use the same approach called value, and this time I'm going to say use this emp fname. No, this dot state dot emp fname. So my value will be set over here. Now it should show something up over there, right? So you can see that there is an error because I'm using prop. It should be props. Okay, now I change that, and there is, let me check the error here. Const. Okay. Everything looks fine. Props. I'm just checking on. Do I have the fname available still? Yes, I have that. Props is not defined. Let me refresh this page. Okay, now you can see that sometime it might show you an error. Never mind, go ahead and refresh that, and that should be fine. So you can see that now it is coming back into the normal state. But again, the same problem here. I cannot change it. I cannot delete it. I just wanted to show you using the mouse. If you try to, let's say, cut, it should cut, but it is not going to replace it. So it is not changing. So the same problem. Now I need to write an on change event. Now this time when I write on change event, I don't call this this dot set state method. So what I do, I say on change equals to, I can write an inline JavaScript, take the event object, use the fat arrow, and then inside this fat arrow, I write a simple code. And that simple code is nothing but my set fname. Okay, and in that set fname, I set the name as e.target.value. So whatever control I'm in, so I just use this control, and then you pick up the value attribute of that control. Now once I am done with that, I can try changing, and it will change in the browser. Now you can see that it's the same thing, but if you recall that I had around 40 lines of code to do the same thing, which requires me to write only few lines. Now I haven't done the other one, so let me also do that. So I'll say first name, and then I copy the whole thing and I put it over here. I say last name. Okay. Now last name, maybe I can use something like emp lname, and I can even have a method called emp lname, and I can just copy this and create an emp lname and change this method to emp lname, and then get the prop lname. Okay, so what happens, like if I put a break, it becomes the same as my class component before, but with only 20 lines of code, right? It's half of the code. Now you can see that it's neat, it's simple. These two lines that does the magic. You just call them in your control, right? So you don't have to, let's say, initialize a constructor because it's not a class. You don't have to set the state object, right? With multiple attribute. Now, one of the things you can also consider in React Hook is that you can actually use an object, right? So here I created two different EMPF name and EMPL name. You can put them in an object. So it can also handle an object and you can control this use state. You don't have to, let's say, define anything. So unless you are doing anything explicit, but let's say if you are having this kind of function call, which is a very simple one, if you don't do any calculation, you can do an inline. Otherwise, you can write a JavaScript function over here. Function inside a function is possible. So you can pretty much write a function over here, say const fn equals to function e. Okay, you can even use this arrow function, so not the conventional one, the arrow function. So same thing, right? So you say that and then you define the function over here. Now you can also do this kind of function declaration in your application and write the function, right? So but we are not doing it, so we're just writing that inline thing. So you, if you notice here, if I need to, let's say, display it over here like I was doing earlier, so I will say that first show me the last name and then show me the first name. Okay, so last name comma first name, and it shows you, and you just change and it reflects the change in the h1 tag, and React can handle that state management without the class component using the function component, right? Function is something which is first class in JavaScript, so you get all the features of JavaScript comp object property attribute in function, so you can use it in many different ways, and it's easy, convenient, and then faster to write and then maintain, etc. So function has a lot of benefits over class, and that's when this hook is going to replace whatever you have done in the class. But React is still supporting class, and it will continue to support class because there are a lot of legacy application which is built using class due to this same reason of state management. But imagine that they don't have to change anything. They can continue. But if you're building new component, uh, the recommendation is that you should build them using function, using hook, right? So hook has got many more new options. So I did not want to talk about all of the hook thing. I will let you explore. And in fact, if you go into the React home documentation, that's what probably it's a good time to walk you through the reactjs.org, react.js. So let me just type that, search it, reactjs.org. And you see that it is having nice little documentation, tutorial, blogs for announcements. So if you go to the documentation, then it starts talking about the installation, right? How do you create a new React app, right? What I did is that I use this create React app thing, which is basically suggested in this documentation, right? It is built by Facebook. So if you go to the GitHub page of that, you will see that it's being maintained and created by Facebook. So you can create an app, pretty simple, right? Every time you create a React app, it'll work without any trouble, and you will not find any challenges. Now you can also learn about hooks. So you can see that they have many different things. And I would recommend that you listen to one of the videos they have in the announced in the React Conference 2018, and he really demonstrated the the problem which Hook really tried to solve. Right, so you will he first writes thing in class component, and then he writes that same thing in Hook component, Hook using Hook, and then he compares them and shows the power and benefit of Hook. Right, so this is really a nice video to watch, which is there in the YouTube, also in the Hook documentation. So I highly recommend that you watch this video to understand the benefit of Hook. so that you don't spend too much time learning the class, because it's not something you should be investing a lot of time on. For example, because there are a lot of things which you can do with hooks, you don't need the class anymore, right? So you can actually have many different other thing, like for example, we have seen how to manage the state using hooks. So use state is one of the hooks, right? And then we have got something called use effects, right? And then use effects is like what happens when you want to do something after the thing has been, right? So you can say that you this many times, show some outside, right? These are things which can who can really handle it. So I can actually go through that. And what I cover today are all core components of React.js. Okay, so they are not something like a third party. Why I wanted to explicitly call this out is mainly because React focus is only on managing the DOM, right? So for example, it is concerned about rendering and the state management. That's the main concern of React today, right? So for example, if you need to do other things like authentication or calling an API, probably you'll use some third-party API to do that, right? So that's why the core component of React is really, really small, but it's important for us to understand that, because all of the other third-party things like Redux, right? So we'll also, you will explore about Redux, which is a centralized state management beyond component, right? So when you have component and inside a component, managing state at that root level becomes really critical, because then you will be able to access them. So you need to lift that state above, right? It becomes more tedious to do that. How do you handle that using Redux? Because Redux is sort of like a database, right? You can imagine that it is sitting outside of the React component. You can fetch the value, you can update them, you can do all those things, but it's third-party library. It's not part of the React, right? So Redux also helps you fetch the value using API, so you can watch them out and then play around with that. So we will probably explore that a little later, but this is the core component of React, and that will give you a good kickstart. And one of the things I also have noticed that while doing the React thing, right, you need to have a bit of fair understanding about ES6, that is ECMAS script, which got released in 2015. And from then onwards, JavaScript become really modern, right? So all the component of, let's say, all the concept of array destructuring, modules, uh, let's say const keyword, all these things comes from that ES6. So maybe you want to go back and have a refresher on ES6. So if you just type like what it requires you to know about ES6 while you are working on React, there are a lot of nice blog posts, YouTube tutorials available, an hour-long YouTube tutorial talking about how do you, what all you need to know about ES6, because ES6 has got many different components, right? In many different releases. So you don't need to know all of them. Probably focus on few basic stuff, which is basically being used in React. So go ahead and then try to explore that. And hope this was helpful, right? And I think you have enjoyed, and I just wanted to open it up for question and answer if you have any.